Hey, what is up, mortals? Welcome Season 1 Part 7 of What If Quirks Were Outlawed. I just wanted to greet you guys by just saying, sit back and relax, you're in for a treat. So, we begin. Toshinori was out doing his usual patrol, on the lookout for any suspicious activity. Usually he would be with Bakugo these days, but the Ashen Blonde was currently under the care of Stain. This left Toshinori on his own to both patrol and worry for the young vigilantes he had taken in. Midoriya and Kirishima would be patrolling together without supervision, and he couldn't help but have a bad feeling in his gut. He ultimately shrugged it off, however, for even Stain had been impressed with the teens. If that said anything, it meant that they are more than capable of handling themselves. The feats that the teens had done so far were so impressive to Toshinori that he couldn't stop thinking about it. He was running low on time, and he needs to find someone to carry on his legacy. The blonde was confident that this someone would be one of the young vigilantes, and he already had his sights locked onto one of them specifically. Toshinori continued his train of thought while walking down the streets until a cry for help broke him out of it. The blonde man didn't stop to think. He just ran into the alleyway that it came from. He ran at top speed so that he would get there in time, but he was confused when arriving where he thought that the scream had originated. There was no one there. There wasn't even a trace of human activity. Toshinori wondered what was going on, and even started to believe that he had imagined the cry for help. His questions were quickly answered, however, when the presence of an ominous figure made itself known in the alley. Toshinori didn't need to turn around to know who this was, for his presence alone had been etched into his soul. But the blonde still turned around, filled with both shock and rage as he met eyes with the man that was before him. He looked like an ordinary man, but his aura said otherwise. He wore a suit, and a certain engraving on said suit made it clear that this man was with the AQTF. He looked at Toshinori without saying a single word, because no words were needed. The situation had been made clear the second that the figure decided to make himself known. This battle is kill or be killed. The club was packed to the brim with people of various origins, shapes, and sizes, all surrounding the caged ring in the center. Within the cage were two figures, and they could be described as polar opposites. On one end was a tall and muscular man with long light brown hair and a plague mask. This was none other than the #1 fighter in this domain, Kendo Rappa. On the other side was a much shorter boy with a green appearance and a metallic mask covering the lower part of his face. This was none other than the vigilante responsible for the defeat of both Endeavor and Sir Night-Eye. His name was Izuku Midoriya, but all except for one in this domain knew him by the name of Dekoru. The two fighters stared at each other, one being more skeptical than the other. Meanwhile, in the club's VIP room were 5 individuals. These were Kirishima, Anjiro, Ashido, Uraraka, and Overhaul, observing as the match was being announced. Anjiro had just been brought there after his defeat and was quickly filled in on the situation, but only served to make him uncertain. "Are you sure that this guy can do it? Rappa is almost twice his size," Anjiro exclaimed quite angrily towards his now red-haired friend. Kirishima was about to answer him, but he was beaten to it by none other than Overhaul. "Size isn't everything. The fact that he defeated Endeavor is proof of that. My question is how he plans on winning. Does he perhaps have a strong quirk?" the masked man said, sounding just as cold as always. Everyone was silent after hearing this, for they almost had no hope. It was bad enough that they had to rely on someone they didn't know, but they didn't know what quirk this person had. It was almost best to just give up immediately, but Kirishima didn't think that way. He knew the disadvantage that Midoriya was in. He knew that it might as well be impossible to win, but he still believed. The green-haired boy hadn't just saved him from Endeavor, he defeated Night-Eye by outsmarting him. He knew that it would be hard, but he still had hope for Midoriya's victory. "Listen to me now, because I will only say this once. The only person that will walk out of that ring victorious is Dekoru," Kirishima then said, sounding like he was trying to convince himself as much as the others. The other teens looked at him quite shocked, before deciding to believe in Kirishima's judgment. Overhaul looked unamused as usual, before responding by saying, "We'll see about that." Tension was rising in the air, and the fighters were getting ready. The match had been fully announced, both contenders introduced. Now they just waited for the bell to sound. Midoriya looked calm, but he was actually very nervous. He was carrying a lot on his shoulders right now, the lives of himself and 4 other people. He didn't know if he was ready, if he actually had the power to pull this off. "Hey, kid," a gruff voice said, knocking Midoriya out of his thoughts. The green-haired boy looked to see that it was Rappa, who looked at him while saying, "The boss claims that you're special, is that true?" With what seemed to be his usual voice. Midoriya was still nervous, and he didn't know what to say. Rappa must have been talking about how he defeated Endeavor, but Midoriya wasn't alone that night. In almost every fight he's been through so far he had help from a stronger individual, but that wasn't the case now. He's alone now, and there is nothing about him that is special. Midoriya clenched his fist in frustration, hating how weak he was, until he stopped when he remembered the words that Kirishima had said to him just minutes before now. The redhead believed in him, somehow, so maybe it was time for him to start believing in himself for once. The green-haired vigilante shed his shell of nervousness, donning a new one of confidence, before answering Rappa's question. "You'll just have to wait and see for yourself," he said, not a single ounce of nervousness left in his body. Rappa was surprised by this response, before grinning with excitement as he walked to his side of the ring. Both fighters now stood a fair distance away from each other, both having taken their stances. They stood silent and stared at the other, preparing themselves for what's to come. Then, as the tension was at its highest, the bell sounded. Rappa wasted no time, and immediately threw the first punch towards the vigilante. His fist ripped and tore through the air, bellowing as it approached at terrifying speeds. Then a loud bang was heard, leaving everyone stunned and silent. Rappa's fist was now still, having been fully extended. At the end of it, everyone expected to find a broken vigilante, but they didn't. Rappa's fist had missed its target. It hadn't collided with anything. Just half a meter to the side of his fist stood the vigilante, completely unharmed. Rappa was infamous for being completely undefeated, but there was something else that made him even more terrifying. In every match that he's fought so far, he has won with one single punch. He always launched the first one, he always landed it, and it always defeated his opponent, until today. Everyone looked at the vigilante in shock and astonishment, almost not wanting to believe what he just did. It wasn't that Rappa had missed his target, it was something else. No way. He avoided the first strike. Ajiro shouted in disbelief, not believing his eyes for a second. Even Overhaul was shocked by this, because he noticed something odd about Rappa's fist. It was way slower than he remembered it to be. Rappa was surprised to see this result, but it didn't stop him from attacking. The brawler took the offensive and began throwing punch after punch relentlessly. Midoriya, on the other hand, was somehow avoiding all of them. The volley of strikes kept flying, with the young vigilante remaining untouched. Eventually, Rappa staggered from losing his balance, and Midoriya took advantage of it. The vigilante closed the gap between himself and the brawler, before delivering an elbow strike to his nose. A loud crack could be heard, and the audience looked even more shocked, as Rappa staggered backwards while covering his nose. Overhaul was even more shocked now, as he witnessed the scene while saying, "That kid, he drew first blood," sounding just as shocked as he looked. Midoriya stood tall in front of his opponent, readying to both attack and defend. But that was when Rappa gave him a weird look. He was smiling. The brawler, even though he was painfully clutching his bleeding nose, was smiling with joy. He looked at Midoriya before saying, "I felt that, I actually felt that. That attack actually got to me." His voice sounded both happy and shocked. Midoriya was confused upon hearing this, until he saw Rappa blow some blood out of his nose before taking a stance and saying, "Kid, you're awesome," with even more joy and excitement, as he charged in for another flurry of attacks. The battle continued like this. Rappa kept throwing a never-ending barrage of attacks, and Midoriya kept avoiding all of them, while landing his own hits in Rappa's weak spots. The observers in the VIP room were all in awe as they witnessed the small vigilante slowly, but certainly, whittle down the giant brawler in front of him. "He's fast," Ashido said in awe, reflecting what she was seeing in the ring. "No, he's not fast, Rappa's slow," Overhaul answered, having returned to his usual cold self. Everyone turned to the masked man, as he began to explain. "It looks like Rappa's fist isn't moving at its usual speed. It's almost like his quirk has been tampered with," the masked man said. Everyone was shocked upon hearing this, especially Kirishima. Midoriya was quirkless if he remembered correctly, so he shouldn't be able to cancel Rappa's quirk. This could only mean one thing: someone else in the crowd was interfering with the fight. Kirishima smiled upon realizing this, for this meant that Midoriya actually had a chance to win. The redhead then turned his attention towards his friends, seeing that both Ashido and Uraraka were cheering for Midoriya. Ajiro, however, looked concerned. "Is something wrong, Ajiro?" the redhead asked, wondering what was bothering his blonde friend. Ajiro looked at Kirishima with concerned eyes, before saying, "He's fighting like an amateur. He's wasting so much of his stamina with those wasteful movements of his," with a tone that almost sounded angry. Kirishima didn't expect this from Ajiro, so he took a closer look at Midoriya. What he found made him just as concerned as his blonde friend. Midoriya was avoiding Rappa's attacks, but it was far from perfect. Every time he dodges, he moves in a wasteful way, which in turn makes him lose an unnecessary amount of stamina. At this rate, he might wear himself out before Rappa hits the ground. The battle raged on, and one could clearly see the effects of damage and exhaustion on both fighters. Midoriya was starting to slow down due to his stamina almost being depleted, but Rappa had been whittled so much that he was in the same condition as Midoriya. They were nearing their limits, but they refused to give up for their own different reasons. Rappa threw another punch, barely missing the vigilante. Midoriya took this opportunity to close in and deliver another devastating blow. He got closer to Rappa and then, with all of his might, landed a blow to the brawler's liver. Rappa staggered from the pain, looking like he was ready to collapse. Midoriya believed that his victory was certain, for a hit to the liver can bring anyone to their knees. Unfortunately, he made the mistake of underestimating Rappa. The green-haired boy lowered his guard as the brawler landed on his knees. But this was a mistake. Out of nowhere, a powerful blow was thrown towards Midoriya's right side. The vigilante barely had any time to react, and could only defend by shielding himself with his right arm. A loud crack could be heard, and the green-haired vigilante was thrown into one of the cage walls. Ajiro's worry had come true. Midoriya had wasted so much of his stamina that he couldn't avoid that attack. Not only that, but the mysterious power that had been suppressing Rappa's quirk until now had lost its effect. The vigilante pulled himself back up from the cage wall, grunting in pain as he did. His right arm was broken, which left him with yet another setback. Rappa was also struggling to stand, having been whittled down severely. Both fighters were in bad condition, which meant that one thing was certain. This battle was beginning to reach its conclusion. Rappa entered a berserking rage as he charged and threw another punch at Midoriya. The vigilante barely dodged it, noticing how Rappa had slowed down again. He bit through the pain as he delivered another hit to Rappa's nose. The brawler was forced to stagger in pain, blinding himself as he instinctively reached for his face. But he forced it away and readied himself to throw another punch at Midoriya, who had disappeared. Rappa was confused, for it looked like his opponent had vanished into thin air. His confusion was answered, however, when he felt something jump onto his back and wrap itself around his neck and body. It didn't take long for him to realize that this was the vigilante, sneaking up behind him and grabbing him in a rear-naked chokehold. The observers in the VIP room were once again stunned. Midoriya had blinded Rappa by hitting him in the nose. Then he snuck up behind him and caught him by surprise in a chokehold. This was something that surprised Kirishima, for he had never seen Midoriya use grappling before. It made him realize just how hard Midoriya actually works. Rappa tried to break free from Midoriya's hold, but quickly found out that the vigilante wouldn't let go unless he was dead. So he instead ran backwards and rammed his back into one of the cage walls, slamming Midoriya as he did. The green-haired boy coughed blood and was overwhelmed with pain as Rappa repeatedly slammed him into the cage wall, but he still refused to let go. He couldn't lose. Too many people depended on him right now. Rappa didn't stop his brutal pounding on Midoriya as he slowly felt himself lose his strength. He didn't get it. How was this kid so strong? He might be able to suppress quirks, but that shouldn't be enough. He even managed to draw first blood. So where did he find such incredible power? Rappa tried to answer these questions, but could only reach one possible answer in the end. This kid wasn't ready to die just yet. He had something that he needed to do, a place where he needed to be, and something that he needed to become. The weight that this kid, this true warrior, carries is beyond anything he could have imagined, and it only served to fill him with more joy. The brawler smiled through his mask, right before the unexpected happened once more. Right as Midoriya looked ready to let go, Rappa fell to his knees. His body was limp as he crashed into the ground with the vigilante still tied onto his back. The entire arena was still and silent, for they hadn't expected this outcome. But they all burst out in cheers and bellows as the green vigilante sat himself up and raised his hand to the heavens. Everyone was livid, cheering for the new king of the ring. But none of them were cheering as much as the teens in the VIP room. Ashido and Uraraka had tears in their eyes as they cried out in joy. Ajiro was so shocked that he couldn't react, and Kirishima reacted in a similar fashion to the girls. Another person that was shocked was Overhaul. He was expecting Midoriya to lose, but he ended up winning. The masked man had no choice but to honor their deal, with newfound respect towards the man called Dekoru. After the fight, both Rappa and Midoriya were given medical treatment. Shortly after that, Midoriya along with the other teens were brought in front of Overhaul, who sat in his chair looking as cold as always. Midoriya could barely stand on his own due to his injuries, so he leaned onto both Kirishima and Ajiro as he looked towards Overhaul and said, "I won the match, we had a deal." With a strained voice, Overhaul looked untouched by this as he sighed before saying, "Yes, you are free to go. Before you leave, however, there's something about you that's been bugging me all this time. Why did you choose to become a vigilante, when you of all people should benefit from this society?" With his usual cold voice, Midoriya didn't expect to hear this question, but he should have. This might as well be $1 million question, and he could tell that Kirishima and the others also wanted to know the answer. Midoriya looked at the mask-wearing Yakuza before giving him his answer. "That's a simple question, so I'll give you a simple answer. I did it because I decided to do the right thing," the green-haired vigilante said, sounding calm despite being injured. Overhaul didn't expect to hear this answer, so he prompted Midoriya to continue. "I don't think it's right for those with quirks to be mistreated and have to live in fear. I became a vigilante to help people, And because I believe that society is wrong in how they view and treat quirks, Midoriya said, sounding just as calm as he did before. Overhaul was once again surprised, but he quickly returned to his usual self before saying, I believe that most of society would agree when I say that quirks are a disease. With his usual cold voice, Midoriya was a little affected by this, but it wasn't enough to discourage him. Then most of society is wrong. Cavemen probably reacted similarly to tools and fire before realizing the benefits that came with using them. The vigilante said, just as unfazed as he was before. Overhaul was outright shocked by now. This vigilante truly wants to change society. And he even believes in quirks. The mask-wearing Yakuza almost felt defeated as he leaned over in his chair and said, You're an odd one, Dekoru. With a quiet voice, Midoriya couldn't help giving a gentle smile at this, and he could sense that the other teens were smiling with him. But that was quickly ruined when the sound of a loud bang, followed by something similar to the marching of soldiers, filled the room. Overhaul stood up from his seat as everyone looked outside, only to find out what was happening. The AQTF, they found us, the Yakuza leader shouted, as his men started to move out and fight back. Overhaul looked towards the teens, almost looking a little annoyed, before shouting, You need to get out of here, now. The teens didn't waste a second and started to move out, almost carrying Midoriya as they did. They didn't get far, however, before they were stopped by a muscular figure. It was Rappa, and he looked serious. The group expected Rappa to try and stop them, but were surprised when he said, Follow me, before walking through a door. The teens were confused, but they didn't question it too much as they followed the brawler with haste. The room they had been led to looked to be some kind of storage with multiple crates along the walls. The teens didn't get to analyze it too much before Rappa proceeded to barricade the door with one of the crates. He then walked over to the other end of the room to move another crate and reveal what looked to be a secret door in the ground. The boss had many of these made in case of an emergency, like this one. It'll lead you to an alleyway far away from here. Use this to get away, Rappa said, the serious tone in his voice never disappearing. Midoriya and the other teens were all confused by this, so he decided to ask, Why are you helping us? Aren't you angry that you lost? With a voice that perfectly reflected his confusion, Rappa looked at him with a dead serious glare before saying, You defeated me fair and square, no hard feelings, and, with a serious tone, before stopping himself. Everyone waited for the rest, as they watched a grin creep up on Rappa's face as he continued. You are easily one of the strongest people I've ever faced. I had such a blast. I want to face you again Sunday, so I need you to get out of this alive. With an excited and joyful voice, Midoriya was shocked to hear this, but it made him happy. He had earned the respect of a strong fighter, and he couldn't help but also want to face Rappa again someday. This exchange was cut short, however, when banging could be heard from the barricaded door. Rappa quickly turned his full attention towards the door as he shouted, I'll hold them off, run and don't look back. The teens didn't need to be told twice and quickly took off running through the secret underground tunnel. They couldn't help but feel bad for Rappa, but there was no other way. They prayed that they would meet him again. If they didn't, they would have to make sure that his sacrifice wasn't in vain. Outro. Thank you all for sticking around, and I hope that you enjoyed. Before you leave, we would just like to let you know that We The Celestials has many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you'll need is right below here in the description, so feel free to check out all the other incredible projects our team creates. Secondly, on behalf of We The Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. That's all for today's video, so goodbye and have a divine day.